You're listening to Puma Podcast.
Hello, I'm Franco Luna, Puma Podcast, and you're listening to Teka Teka News. This is episode 3 of a series in Teka Teka News called Para Po, where we unpack Metro Manila's mobility woes. The Philippine Statistics Authority says 1,670 people ages 19 and below are killed in road crashes every year. That's 4 kids each day. And this is what I'll be talking about in our episode. Kaya bumubusi na lang po muna ako. We will be talking about road safety in school zones, and you might hear some stories which you may find upsetting. If this episode is not for you, that's okay. But I do recommend that you check out my other stories on transportation, such as Sarao Motors reimagines a king of the road fit for the times, and Para Po, Kumusta na si Kuya bus driver. Okay, sige, tuloy na po tayo.
So, we stopped at the intersection. Tapos, yung tricycle driver namin, chinichika niya rin kami na, ma'am, pwede namin kayo sunduin mamaya, ganyan. Tapos, we saw a truck racing by, and then the next sound was a loud scream, parang primal scream of a dad na nagmumura na, hoy! Ganyan.
That was road safety advocate Riz Comia. She's a policy researcher with the Move Us One Transport Coalition. Riz witnessed a child get pinned under a motorcycle as a truck was speeding away in Bacolod City.
What stayed with me was the horror of seeing a child robbed of her future dahil lang sa taong nagmamadali na matapos yung trabaho. Kasi baka siya rin may minimit na kota, baka siya rin may iuwi ang pamilya. Ang tumatak talaga sa akin, at gusto ko sanang tumatak din sa ibang tao, ay kailangan nating i-share yung kalsada. Kailangan magbahaginan tayo. Kasi sa lahat ng pagmamadali mo, may chance na may mabangga ka na tao din na uuwi sa pamilya nila.
The story was picked up by local media in the days after. Police reports say the motorcycle stopped at a traffic light, but the truck allegedly tried to beat the red light, which caused him to ram into the motorcycle.
So talagang kailangan ang mga bata from a certain age araw-araw bumiyahe. And that means with the way that things are now on Philippine roads, every day, sinusugal nila ang buhay nila on the roads.
Yan naman si Attorney Daphne Marcelo. Road Safety Project Manager siya sa Imagine Law Philippines. Attorney Daphne says there are 3 scenarios that can play out anytime you're on our roads. You die, you get hurt, or you arrive intact. That means it's more than a transport issue, it's also a public health issue.
Best case scenario, you reach your destination safely. Good. Second scenario, you are involved in a road crash and you survive, but you or another person who's involved in the crash sustained debilitating injuries. And that means years of rehabilitative treatment, trying to regain use of your limbs. And the third scenario, which is the worst case, is you die. You die if you are involved in or you cause a road crash. Something as mundane as pedestrians actually using our roads every day. And you do that for a host of reasons. Diba? Papunta kang palengke, papunta kang Mercury para bumili ng gamot. For children, they go to school. For us, we go to work. We travel for leisure. Can really result in just 1 out of 3 health outcomes.
Even the government acknowledges this. Here's former Undersecretary Steve Pastor.
Accidents can be avoided. Kaya po crashes yung ginagamit nating term is because we can do something to avoid such incident. Nasa kamay po natin sa gobyerno, ganun din po sa pribadong sektor, yung mga pamamaraan at mga inisyatibo upang makatulong pa po tayo sa ating mga kababayan. I just want to highlight certain numbers po. Every day, more than 300 Filipinos die on road crashes. 12,000 Filipinos die on road crashes every year, and 1.3 million worldwide. These are big numbers. These are stark numbers that we can address.
There are a number of usual suspects that often come out in media reports. For one thing, many roads in the Philippines are in poor condition, with potholes, uneven pavements, and narrow lanes. Many vehicles in the Philippines are also not roadworthy. They might have faulty brakes, worn tires, or other defects that make them unsafe to drive. There's also a lack of awareness about the dangers of road crashes among both children and adults. Many might not know the basic safety rules for walking, cycling, and driving. It's easy to point to that, and it makes sense too. But Attorney Daphne says the main culprit is speed.
Sa lahat ng factors that contribute to why people are involved in road crashes or whether the injuries or the outcomes that they sustain in road crashes is debilitating or fatal, is speed, infrastructure, all that. We really talk about speed because the faster that a motor vehicle goes, the higher the probability that it is involved in a road crash and the higher the probability that the results are devastating. Yung itsura ng mga kalsada in a school, in a fifth-class municipality would be different as well. There, the problems would be the road is unpaved or the road is along a national highway where 80 kilometers per hour yung allowed na speed. Kasi again, where before, talahiban yung surroundings ng 80 kilometers per hour na national highway, ngayon biglang may school. And so, as we said, 80 kilometers versus 20 kilometers per hour na safe school zone speed limit dapat. Yun ang challenges faced by our children, depending on where they live.
Advocates like Daphne say there's so much more we can be asking when these things happen. Naka-child restraint ba siya? Ano yung hugis at itsura ng mismong kalsada? Madulas ba? Muulan? Madilim? Was there paint that was visible? But at the end of the day, it all comes down to how our roads are planned and designed. Dinisenyo ba ito para maging ligtas sa mga pedestrian?
So in other countries that are developed, they actually have segregated lanes. You would not see an 8 or 10-wheeler truck sharing the same road space with a person traveling on foot. But that is a very common scenario here in the Philippines, especially in our roads in the provinces, the more rural areas. Tas sa tabi niya, there's no barrier, no fence to protect them. A farmer or a school child traveling on foot. And that's inherently unsafe. That's the reality that many of our school children face just to go to their schools to get an education.
The usual framing and narrative we see in media reports is that it's a personal and individual responsibility on the part of whoever's behind the wheel. But urban planners say that's a simplistic way of looking at it, because our problems are more systemic than that.
Number one, kung may safe pedestrian crossing, yung rubberized paint to indicate that children will be crossing, yung typical zebra crossing that we know, that's usually not present in many of our roads around public schools. Or kung meron mang pintura, burado na, hindi na siya naging na-maintain ng LGU. Second, parking, on-street parking of so many vehicles because we know that here, hindi masyado na-enforce yung no parking on streets. So you have a plethora of vehicles. Hindi lang naman mga pribadong sasakyan. May mga motorcycle, may mga tricycle na kinontrata for private use. These vehicles park usually in front of schools. And there's many dangers presented to children, especially at dismissal or yung pagpapasok.
And all it took to put that to the test was a quick stroll along the sidewalk where I frequented in college. But more on that after this quick break. Good afternoon. It's Thursday, June 8th, 4:42 p.m. I'm standing here on a broken sidewalk along Katipunan Avenue. There are two colleges along this road and meron pang UP Diliman, PSBA, Kumusta, and St. Bridget in the immediate vicinity. And man, look at this place. May kainan, May eskwelahan, may mga kondo pa. But there are vehicles all around me speeding. Irinig nyo naman, ano? I'm reminded of my own college years way back when. And even then, I distinctly remember thinking, grabe, para talagang obstacle course yung mga sidewalks dito. Even just the sound of the street, with all the cars zipping by, will give you an idea of how unsafe it is to be on the sidewalks around our schools. Have a listen. Here along Katipunan, the only way to get across is an elevated walkway. There are just 3 of those along the stretch of the whole avenue. Take note, mula UP Diliman hanggang LRT2 Katipunan, mga 3.5 kilometers yan ayon sa Google Maps. Imagine having to walk that stretch as a student of the schools in the area. Ang bibilis na nga ng mga kotse, tapos ang liit pa ng sidewalk.
Behavior of people is dictated by infrastructure. When you look at our streets and you audit how space is allocated, i.e. a large portion of it allocated for motor vehicles, walang bangketa, unprotected sidewalks, then it shows to the motorists that look, this is our turf. And you guys, i.e. pedestrians, bikers, do not belong here. In short, amin to eh. Nakikigamit lang kayo. So, tumabi kayo pag dadaan kami.
You just heard Ira Cruz. He's a transport planner and director of Alt Mobility Philippines. For him and other road safety advocates, the issue of road crashes involving children comes down to this. Walking is unsafe because our streets in general were built for cars and are unsafe for pedestrians.
It's no different from most small streets in actually anywhere in the Philippines, no. I guess it's just aggravated because then you have children that are unable to defend themselves. What I mean is anywhere you go in the Philippines, basta maliit na yung kalsada, you'll notice wala nang sidewalks, puro kalsada na lang, or sometimes may obstruction sa kalsada which forces people, especially children, to walk in the middle of the road. And again, as I was saying, this just gets more pronounced in streets where there are children because there's more of them. But also at the same time, if you look at an SUV and you imagine a child walking in front of an SUV, almost always a child's height will not even clear the hood of an SUV. Which is why sometimes they'll say, hindi ko nakita yung bata, bigla na lang tumawid.
Kamukha ng sinabi ni Ira, it's important to think about what the designs communicate. It makes sense, for example, that wide, straight roads make people drive faster, di ba? Right now, I want you to look back at how you got to school growing up. Di ba sabi nga nila, a lot of the nostalgia of college students comes from the fact that their campuses are their first and last time living in a walkable community. That's a safety issue too. Ira also says Riz's story from earlier also illustrates that these problems are happening outside of Metro Manila. Remember, sa Bacolod nangyari yung na-witness niya. I'm turning over the mic to Ira now to tell us what we've all been missing in the conversation on road safety. Because he says there are easy, quick fixes that are possible.
When you look at streets that are designed properly, say for example, you have less car lanes, you have wider sidewalk, shaded areas with tree canopies, the behavior of cars is that they'd slow down. Because they know that they're coming into a place where they are not the primary user, but also things like trees or center islands or flora and fauna actually creates or at least induces a behavior for vehicles to slow down. So design has a lot to do with how people behave.
I asked Ira this, ano ang itsura ng isang tunay na safe na school zone?
One should be, again, a larger sidewalk. I mean, the 3 meters is really just minimum. The higher the population, then the wider it should be. Then you have to implement speed limits. And when you say implement speed limits, it's not just about having a policy that says 15 kilometers an hour. but also designing the road in such a way that it would also slow down vehicles. For instance, introducing planter boxes in the middle of the street to create an impression or to create an illusion that the street is narrowing. And in fact, actually narrows the road, which induces the motor vehicle to slow down regardless of what the prevailing speed limits is.
Urban planners actually have a term for that, traffic calming. That essentially means policy and infrastructure that can induce slower speeds without directly or explicitly limiting them. Think speed bumps, clearly marked pedestrian crossings, curb extensions, shared spaces, and even trees and vegetation. Think about the effect that has on drivers. The net impact of all of these things combined is improved safety for motorists, pedestrians, and cyclists. They make it easier for children to cross the street safely. Now think about how little of those we have in and around our schools. All we have are signs. Kung tutuusin, that's still less than the bare minimum. And if speeding cars kill, then traffic calming saves lives.
But obviously, eye on the street or there being other people or onlookers seeing what's happening on the street adds to the safety. So that should be part of road design.
The eyes on the street principle is a theory in urban planning that says streets are safer when there are more people around to watch them. That's because people are more likely to behave well when they know that they're being watched. That was also the logic behind things like automated no-contact apprehension, for instance.
We should also make streets walkable in the sense that it's comfortable for people to walk. I like using this illustration because every Sunday, especially now that the pandemic is, I guess, easing up, people would go to malls. And, if you take, say, Mega Mall, for instance, people would walk from one end to the other end, go up the escalator, and so on and so forth. And if you add that up, I think the length of SM Mega Mall is about 500 meters. And if you add all of that up, that's about 4 kilometers of walking. So if you think about it, 4 kilometers is actually walkable. But people don't do it because our sidewalks are hostile.
Talk of road safety for children is also happening in other parts of the world. In 1971, Dutch journalist Vic Legenhoff wrote an impassioned article about the more than 500 children who died that year in traffic and bicycle accidents. That list of casualties included his own daughter. The article he wrote was entitled "Stop Murdering Children." People were in uproar. They carried banners and slogans and marched through the streets, bringing bicycles to the square in front of the town buildings. Under the weight of that public pressure, the Dutch government was forced to find solutions practically overnight. For Amsterdam, the solution was pretty simple. Speed kills, but only motorized vehicles get to that level of speed. And so the number of cars circulating in the inner city was limited, the maximum speed was limited, the parking fee increased, and the car lanes were narrowed to make room for pedestrians and cycles. They decided it was time to move people and not cars.
They are just responding to the environment that is created for them. So if government really wants to be able to create or at least improve road safety, then they need to go back and rethink the way that they design streets, which is also an extension of how they prioritize budget.
There's a reason road safety advocates resist the term road accident. These things don't happen by accident, they're by design. Because there's so much that we can be doing in this moment that we're just not.
The Philippine Road Safety Action Plan puts forward or lays down the plan for the next 5 years. But people are dying today. It seems to have failed in coming up with, as you've mentioned, low-hanging fruits. What are the things that we can do today? And there are several things that we can do today that doesn't even have to be expensive. Things like updating policy. Updating policies such as road safety, road standards, proper enforcement, or I'm not naman a lawyer, so I don't think I'll be put in contempt. But I hope the Supreme Court finally releases a decision on an end cap, and we hope it's in favor of allowing for non-contact apprehension to continue.
The Department of Transportation launched the Philippine Road Safety Action Plan with the goal of reducing road crash deaths by at least 35% by 2028. The plan aims to create a safer road environment through road safety management and post-crash response. But if this is where we are, and the policy environment and lack of infrastructure are what enable road violence, Ira says it's probably safe to say
It's a question of political will. And I think that's harder to crack. Because, we're seeing a lot of cities now that close streets in commercial areas, not even commercial areas, streets in general, during the weekend. They call it People's Streets, where it's closed Saturday and Sunday. So that answers your question. It is possible. But what is stopping them from making it permanent? And I think it's because they're afraid of the backlash from the small number of people that are in cars, which includes them, unfortunately. But I am calling to attention people that are at a level where they can make a difference, the decision makers, from the executive to the legislative, for them to really put their foot down and prioritize it. And it's reflected also in how governments, there is no stronger way to convey the government's priority than its budget. And if you look at the budget of the road sector, you can see that it's nowhere near priority of government.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka News. Again, I'm Franco Luna. This episode was edited by Pidoy Blanco. That was the third episode of Teka Teka Para Po, our transportation segment unpacking Metro Manila's mobility woes. If you like this episode, share it with a friend or two. And of course, don't forget to follow Teka Teka News and Puma Podcast on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. Thanks for listening.